Hi, good morning, and everyone. Welcome back to Karmayogi Talks. This is Adil Zainulbhai, Chairman, Capacity Building Commission, and I'm very pleased to have Manish Sabharwal here. As I don't know if many of you know him, but he's a very talented person on many different fronts. First of all, he's a successful businessman who runs TeamLease, which is one of the largest job matching services in India. He provides people for hundreds of thousands of roles. I think it has over 300,000 employees in 5,000 cities. Uh, he sponsored India's first vocational university, operates the fastest growing national PPP apprenticeship program, and has been involved in hiring 2 million employees over the last 20 years. So if anyone understands what's happening in the job market and in employment, it is Manish. And that's why we're very thrilled to have him here. In addition to that, he is really an amazing thinker. As you can see behind him, you can see hundreds of books, and Manish tells me that it's a two-story library. And I can tell you that he has actually read all of those books. So he's a voracious leader. He thinks a lot about different topics. He can quote you from all sorts of people. And yet, with all of that, he has also helped the government enormously. He was an independent director on the board of Reserve Bank of India. He's on the advisory board of the Comptroller and Auditor General, governing board member of the National Council of Applied Economic Research. And I think one of the most wonderful things that he does is that he sponsors a prize for fiction in India, for books in many languages, translations. And, if you are an author and you get selected by the New India Foundation as the book of the year, then you know that you're going to do extremely well. So with all of that, but we're not going to talk about all of that. We are only going to talk to Manish about employment, jobs in India, and how it has evolved. So Manish, if I could get you started, and take you back a little bit so people get the right perspective. What was India's job situation like at the time of independence, and kind of how it evolved, and then we'll come to the present.
I mean, obviously, the British were really bad for India. Between 1820 and 1950, India grew at 0.1% per year, which meant that at the time of independence, 80% of India worked on farms. And that was not necessary for food security. Most countries can do food security, which much less of a proportion in their of their labor force working on farms. Actually, farms have been the shock absorber in India's labor market since independence. Well, there have been two shock absorbers. One was farms and the other was self-employment. But there was this Russian economist who convinced Pandit Nehru in the 1920s that small farms are viable because you don't have to pay yourself a salary, your kids a salary, you don't have to pay your wife a salary, and you don't have to pay rent. And he called it the theory of self-exploitation. I would submit that, India was a child of two reckless experiments in 1947. The political one was spectacular. India was one of the first countries to give universal franchise at birth. Some women in Switzerland got to vote in 1972. And India and Pakistan, born on the same night, have had very different destinies because 3 million people in India win an election and 22 million stand for an election. So I think the reckless experiment on politics worked out very well. But I am neatly dividing politics and economics. But we had run a parallel economic experiment, which was really codified in the 1955 Avadi Resolution and really put into the 1956 Second Five-Year Plan, which really handicapped the private sector job creation, which really slowed down people moving from farm to non-farm employment, which really kept manufacturing employment very low. Now, traditional economics is about moving people from farms to factories. But there are many other labor market transitions. It is moving from formal enterprises to informal enterprises. It is moving from rural areas to urban areas. It is moving from school to work. So there are multiple transitions which really lead to development. And I come at development from a pure belief that there is no such thing as poor people. There are people in poor places. Now, there are six poor places in my mind. 3 of them are physical and 3 of them are conceptual. So let's start with the first most important one, which is which country you're born in. Because the same electrician who moves from Balasore to Lucknow gets 2 times more salary, moves from Lucknow to Bangalore gets 4 times more salary, moves to Dubai gets 8 times more salary, and moves to Switzerland and gets 25 times more salary. So which country you're born in really matters. And this was sort of very obvious to me when I landed in the US in August 1994, when I for my MBA. And by September, I was asking myself, these Americans aren't smarter than us. Why are they richer than us? And clearly, I can beat each one of them individually. But why does the ordinary American make $50,000 a year? And why does the ordinary Indian make 50,000 rupees a year? And that really depends on which country you're born in. But the second one could be which city you're born in. Or let's say which state you're born in. I live in Karnataka. My parents live in Uttar Pradesh. Both states have the same GDP, but Karnataka has one-fourth the number of people, or one-fifth now the number of people. So people in Karnataka are 5 times more productive than people in UP at an aggregate level. So which job you have or which state you have really matters in India. Which city you live in India really matters. If everybody in India lived in Bangalore, our GDP would be more than China. I live in Bangalore. But India's GDP is $2,500 per capita. Bangalore's GDP is $12,500 per capita. So people who were Kannadigas or people who were born in Bangalore suddenly won the ovarian lottery. They were born on the 10th floor. I mean, for somebody who was born in J&K like I was, or my parents who were born in Kanpur, or my sister who was born in a different part of India. So I think which country you're born in, which state you're born in, or which city you live in really matters for your prosperity, right? This is the one. But then you start getting more complicated as we think about the job market, and which were the three conceptual places: which sector you work in, which firm you work in, and which skill you have. See, which sector you work in is very important for people like us. I live in Bangalore. We are very proud of the software industry, but software is only 0.8% of India's employment, but it is 8% of our GDP. While farming today is 45% of our employment, but only 14% of GDP. So why do people in software get paid more? Because they are highly productive. 0.8% produce 8% of GDP. Why do sometimes farmers have distress? Because we have too many farmers. The 45% of our labor force is only producing 14% of GDP. So which sector you work in really matters. Which firm you work in really matters. Why is IBM or why is Apple able to pay much more to its assembly workers in Sri Perumbudur? Because Apple is a highly productive firm. In fact, we just finished a ranking of firms by size, and the largest firms are 24 times more productive than the smallest firms. Now, if you're large, if you can productive, you can pay the wage premium. But if you don't pay the wage premium, you'll never attract the good people, and then you'll never be productive. So which company you work in? Why I was very angry with my mother when I was young. She would always identify people. Usko achhi naukri mil gayi, she works for a multinational. I would say, you are racist, your son is an Indian entrepreneur. Why is a multinational a good employer? But in her mind, multinationals paid higher salaries because multinationals invested more in technology, they invested more in brand, and they invested more in people. That has now changed. Indian companies are as productive. In fact, India is one of the few markets where Indian companies are selling more than multinationals in cars, in banks, in consumer durables, and consumer goods. So India is unlike other emerging markets, Indian companies are actually beating multinationals at their own game when they operate in India. But which firm you do really matters, works for really matters. And then finally, we'll come to which skill you have as a person. So I think there are some skills which pay more. Obviously, it's human nature that when you work with your brains, you get paid more with your hands. I'm not saying it's more just. I'm not saying it's right. But if the people who built my office or the people who built my house probably work harder than I did. But they get paid less than I do because I work with my brains, I work with other people. So I think the cognitively intensive skills, say chip designers, say software programmers, say CNC machine operators rather than packers and loaders. In a factory, you will have CNC machine operators and you will have packers and loaders. The CNC machine operators will get 4 or 5 times what the packer and loader in the same factory will get, while the same marketing person will get 4 times more than the CNC machine provider, while the say the CFO will get 4 times more than the marketing person, and the CEO will obviously get more. So I think we are able to identify now with quite a long level of sophistication on which skills get the wage premium. See, finally, my entire framework to you of which country, which state, which city, which sector, which firm, and which skill is about the wage premium. Because I would make the case to you that from independence, India has not had a jobs problem, we have had a wages problem. See, our official unemployment since 1947, and this is not a fudge. Please don't listen to people who are saying that our unemployment rates are a fudge and the government is hiding the data. Our unemployment rate has stayed between 4 and 8% since 1947. And that is the truth. But our employed poverty, people who have jobs but don't get the wages to pull themselves out of poverty, is almost 30% of the labor force. Now, most of this labor force is in agriculture or is in what I call self-employment, which is really self-exploitation. So if you think about the worries about jobs and wages in the last 10 years, there's been a lot more noise about jobs. Actually, India's trajectory has not changed, but people's aspirations have gone up. Children of this generation are no longer willing for the self-exploitation that their parents were willing to. They're no longer willing to work as Raju Chotu in a shop, getting a little bit of informal money. They want to work in modern retail. They want to work in a factory. They want to work in an office. So I think from 1947 till now, I think even today our challenge, I think 1991 was a very important event in India's economic destiny. It broke with the past. But the problem in job markets is that the flow of jobs since 1991 has not really changed the stock of jobs since 1980, which is what? 45% of our labor force work on farms. Only 11% of our labor force works in manufacturing. Now, that is a really low number because it's almost the same as the United States, which is a rich country and a post-industrial country. So only 11% of our labor force working in manufacturing is a real problem. And that may be the reason why India and China, which had the same per capita GDP in 1991, now China's per capita GDP is 5 times ours. See, I don't want to live in China. I think it's a horrible place to live. But I am jealous of them moving 700 million people from farm to non-farm employment since 1978. So I think one of the challenges in India is that we have too much informal services employment. The second challenge is we have too little factory employment, and we have too many people on farms.
Great. That's boy, you covered 100, you covered 75 years in 8 minutes. That was really a very clear articulation. I wanted to ask you, Manish, we have this strange dichotomy today in which, of course, your company does really well, which is there are actually quite a lot of jobs that are not getting filled. When I talk to large companies in construction, they're forever complaining that they don't have enough masons, carpenters, truck drivers, whatever. When you talk to all the delivery people, delivery companies, Zomatos and others, they're constantly complaining that they don't have enough people. And yet, when the government of India advertises for a relatively low-level position, 100,000 people apply for it, including people who are grossly overqualified, right? So for a clerical position, PhDs will apply. How do you explain this dichotomy, which is real, right? This is what we are observing.
I mean, there are multiple things going on. The matching, see, we have hired somebody every 5 minutes for the last 20 years, but we've only hired 5% of the kids who came to us for a job. And both
Is
of
that
them
right?
are problems. Yes, both of them, we get 2 lakh kids coming to us for a job every month. We probably hire 10,000 of them. So we don't take the 1,90,000 because they don't have the skills for the wages that we are willing to pay. But we've hired somebody every 5 minutes, which really is for 20 years is a remarkable number. Just and it's a child of we were in the right place at the right time. So I think there are three problems. There's a matching problem, which is connecting demand to supply. There's a mismatch problem, which is repairing supply for demand. And there's a pipeline problem, which is preparing supply for demand on the supply side. On the demand side, as I mentioned in the earlier segment, we have too many people working on farms. We have too few people working in manufacturing, and we have too much informal services employment. The government employment problem arises because the government pays too much at the bottom and too little at the top. So I would submit in government employment, the class 2 or class 3 or class 4, whatever, I don't like those terminologies, but every organization has highly paid people or senior people. The government pays senior people much less than they should get paid. But it pays people at the bottom of the pyramid much more than they should get paid for their equivalent jobs, right? So I think that the application for government jobs is really a statistical outlier which reflects the wage premium of the government at the bottom of the pyramid. It's not really unemployment. Most of the 90% of the people who apply for these government jobs already have a job. They are just taking a punt at a higher wage job because in the private sector right now there's so many people looking for jobs, so it's basically an oasis of high wage employment. There's nothing wrong with that if we use that as a lever to sort of raise everybody's bar, but you can't mandate higher minimum wages without enabling more enterprise productivity. So I would submit that this whole dilemma arises, one, from the supply side, from repair, prepare, and upgrade being the continuum. Matching, of course, is important. And on the demand side, since we have not got enough people out of farm employment, there was a Jamaican economist called Arthur Lewis. He was very famous for his Louisian turning point. He got the Nobel Prize that wages in an economy should not go up till you run out of farm labor. Now, China was textbook Arthur Lewis. From 1978 to 1998, wages didn't go up, but from 1998 till 2018, they went up substantially because you had already moved 300, 400 million people out of farms. So for the next 200, 300 million, you had to pay a lot more. Unfortunately for India, the farm to non-farm transition is also being held back by bad urbanization. And I say bad urbanization as in my world, it is basically a divergence between real wages and nominal wages. How I would explain that: in a job fair in Gwalior, one kid told me, give me 4,000 rupees in Gwalior, 8,000 rupees in Gurgaon, 15,000 rupees in Delhi, and 20,000 rupees in Bombay. My bags are packed. Tell me where you want me to go. I said, why do you need 4 times more money to go to Bombay? He said, oh, जितने बच्चे बॉम्बे 10,000 में गए थे सब वापस आ गए, खाना रहना और ऑफिस जाना. Living, eating, and commuting doesn't work at 10,000 rupees. If you think about it, the child wasn't asking. Obviously, he had a purchasing power parity model in his head, and we hired him on the spot. But what he was asking was not a salary. He was asking for reimbursement. खाना रहना ऑफिस जाना ग्वालियर में 4,000 में बन जाएगा, लेकिन बॉम्बे में 20,000 होगा. So much of what employers, unfortunately, job creation has also been clustered in. So India only has 52 cities with more than 1 million people. China has 375 cities with more than 1 million people. We have 6 lakh villages. 2 lakh of those villages have less than 200 people. So can you take jobs to people or people to jobs? Obviously, only a fool would say that you only take people to jobs because that will lead to our overcrowded cities and lead to this massive divergence between real wages and nominal wages, which your child was highlighting. So my answer to your question would be: is there's repair, prepare, upgrade problems. There is a lack of manufacturing jobs, lack of too many farm jobs. And then there is this bad urbanization, which is costing living, eating, and commuting to cost 5, 10, 20 times more in big cities than in rural areas. So technically, employers should just move to having 300 cities where they create jobs. Why would a factory operate within 100 kilometers of Bombay or 200 kilometers of Bombay or Bangalore? You should just set up warehouses and you should build your factories, because now highways have improved so substantially in India. Why would you not set up in Patiala, in Jammu, in Hosur, in all those places which are, or in so many other places where there are many kids who are hungry and more grateful to get a job. So my sense is that this divergence between real wages and nominal wages is as big an explanation for the mismatch that you highlighted, as is the lack of farm factory jobs, as is the lack of repair and upgrade compared to prepare. I mean, one other mistake that we made in the 1950s and 60s was our lack of focus on primary education. So that also shows up in skills, right? Because the fastest growing segment in India's job market today are sales, customer service, and logistics. I wish they were manufacturing. I hope they will be manufacturing because there are a lot of what I call China factory refugees looking to move out of China, because China has really changed its policy towards foreigners. It's changed its policy towards its domestic entrepreneurs. But so the fastest growing segment is sales, customer service, and logistics. And in that, the school skills that you learn in school, reading, writing, arithmetic, the 3 R's, or maybe I'll add the fourth R of relationships, which is soft skills. So my sense is that the school wage premium, if you do a good job in school and you learn reading, writing, arithmetic, and the fourth R of relationships, soft skills, you could really get a wage premium in the service economy compared to the factory economy where your hands and legs mattered much more than your this. So I think that the school lack of fixing primary schools, the lack of manufacturing jobs, and our bad urbanization would probably explain this dilemma or this contradiction where employers can't find employees and employees can't find jobs.
And is that, you talked a little bit about which state you live in. I couldn't help but wondering over here, uh, how uh, how acute is the problem in certain states in the south and in the east, and what is the difference, and what is driving that difference? Are you seeing that difference get bigger or smaller? Are people catching up in terms of jobs, or is the difference getting bigger?
I mean, our Bangalore office, probably, if I would put a sign out there, I would say trespassers will be recruited. In our Kanpur office, I'll say trespassers will be exported, right? I mean, this is a clear, unfortunately accelerating divergence between South and West India and North and East India, right? I mean, the demographics of South and West India, Kerala now has the demographics of Italy. So its population growth has slowed down substantially, which is why Kerala is probably 9.5% Bihari, right? They sent 10% to the Middle East, so they brought 9.5%. Yeah, which is why Chhat is almost a holiday in Kerala, right? I mean, so I think the divergence between South and North India or between West and East India is only going to get amplified because only 5% of population growth in the next 20 years is in Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Andhra, Telangana, Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Kerala in the next 20-25 years. While almost 45% of population growth will be in UP, Odisha, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and West Bengal. And I wish more of us employers would be setting up factories there. I think it's a complex question, right? Why does a certain city or a state become a job magnet? I have often wondered about Bangalore, and I asked a professor once to do a report for me on what are the 10 reasons Bangalore became Bangalore. And he said, well, it was the first electrified city of India because of Kolar gold mines. It was because there was a German guy who planted trees called Grumbel who made it very green. It was because Visvesvaraya created the education cluster here. It was because the Diwan of the Maharaja of Mysore, Mirza Ismail, made a venture capital investment in Walchand Aerospace, which then became HAL, Hindustan Aeronautics, which then created the cluster for public sector. It was because in the 1980s, they deregulated engineering college education. But the one I was intrigued it was because Texas Instruments chose Bangalore in 1981. So I tracked down the person who chose Bangalore, and she said, well, my final choice was Hyderabad, Bangalore, and Chennai because these were the only states which had started deregulating engineering education. But Chennai was hottest weather. So my final two choices were Hyderabad and Bangalore. So I was at the edge of my seat. I said, "So why did you choose Bangalore?" She said, "Oh, I had a cousin there." you know, so I think for all of us who think about attracting investments, I think there is a role of history, there is a role of chance. There's a lot of path dependence on South India's prosperity, which comes from society, which comes from being far away from the borders. But there is also a recognition in South India about the value of human capital. I think there was a very early recognition of the rule of law in some sense. Law and order has substantially improved in Bihar and in UP in the last 10 years, but it still has a long way to go when you compare it to South India and West India. I think the number of engineering colleges, I mean, UP and even Gujarat was so late at deregulating engineering colleges, while the people's supply chain of India's India's IT industry really got going in the 1980s. And it has been really what has created the modern software industry. So I think that, yes, the divergence in the short run, India in the next 5, 10 years will not be able to take jobs to people. It'll have to take people to jobs. But I am hoping that in the next 25 years, because I'm quite clear that 29 chief ministers now matter more than one prime minister for the next 25 years. Because job creation is local, just like all politics is local. There was a big debate in the 1980s. Indira Gandhi once in 10 of her speeches, she said, strong states lead to a weak nation. And N.T. Rama Rao, the Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh, responded, the central government is a conceptual myth. Everything that matters to employers and to citizens is done by state governments. Infrastructure is provided by state governments, healthcare is provided by state governments, education is provided by state governments, and the police and law and order is provided. In some sense, both were wrong because they were taking extreme views. You need a strong central government and you need a strong state government for different functions. But I do think now, hoping in the next 25 years, that strong chief ministers will recognize that they are competing with each other. Global investors have already decided on India. India is the only place where you have a young labor force. India is the only place where you have 1.5 million engineers being produced every year. India is the only place where 300 million people speak English because 90% of the world's software code is written in English. India exported more software than Saudi Arabia did oil in 2021. So I think chief ministers now have a real opportunity to compete based on better human capital, better infrastructure, better rule of law. In fact, I would submit that chief ministers who recognize that creating a fertile habitat for job creation, which attracts high productivity employers who have the productivity to pay the wage premium, is actually the best contest for the next 20 years for India. I think chief ministers who say that, look, it's not about multinational versus Indian companies. It's not about big companies versus small companies. It's not about software versus manufacturing. It is just high productivity employers who deploy land, labor, and capital and combine it in a way that they can pay higher wages is really the contest. So in my mind, yes, the gap between the North and East India and South and West India is increasing. But we have a real urbanization challenge because we don't want mega cities are not always efficient. See, in 1973 there were only 3 cities in the world with more than 10 million people: Mexico, New York, and Tokyo. Today we have 33 cities in the world with more than 10 million people. Unfortunately, 28 of them are in Asia. Unfortunately, 10 of them are in India. So this mega city is an Asian innovation. I hope the future of India is not in cities which have more than 20 million people. I don't think the future of India, of work in India, is in villages with less than 200 people. We have 6 lakh villages, 2 lakh villages with less than 200 people. The sweet spot of India is this 3 to 10 million. And this is where I hope the North and Eastern India Northern and Eastern chief ministers will take the bait and say, we will create good cities between 3 and 7 million people, where you get the economies of scale of being a city, where employers don't have to provide their own transport, provide their own electricity, worry about law and order, but You don't have to get kids to move. I don't think a Bangalore employer can expand today without importing children from other parts of India. So I think that we have to really break this stronghold right now which South and West India have on job creation, not only for South and West quality of life, because shoving more people into Bangalore, the average taxi in Bangalore travels at 8 kilometers an hour now. Most people can walk that fast. So the famous traffic of Bangalore in some sense can be viewed as growth, but it can also be viewed as imbalanced development. So I'm hoping North and East India will take the lead in non-farm formal job creation, which will also be good for India and will also be good for South India.
That's that's terrific, Manish. As usual, talking to you, you get a complete picture. I wanted to follow up on the issue of engineers that you raised, right? You said the South did well because they had liberalized engineering colleges and lots of graduates. Yet at the same time, we hear this famous statistic that somebody said, which is 80% of all engineers are not ready for a job. So once again, can you help explain that dichotomy?
Yeah. See, one of my, the dilemma in education is cost, quality, and quantity. You can get 2 out of 3, you can't get 3 out of 3. Right? So if you raise costs, then you kill quantity because not everybody can afford it, but you improve quality. You raise quality, you kill quality. So cost, quantity, and quality are the dilemma in the early stages when you're building an education system. In the long run, America has reached equilibrium, and there are many other. But for India, we want to be equal and we want to be excellent. See, this is always a dilemma for policymakers, that you want to be equal in a democracy, you want everybody to go to college, which is what actually the world has done. The world has produced more graduates in the last 40 years than the 800 years before that. So there are more graduates produced in the world. But what does that mean? It means 60% of taxi drivers in Korea now have a college degree.
Is that
31% of Walmart checkout clerks in the US now have a college degree. 15% of high-end security guards in India have a college degree. So, but a college degree matters because of social signaling value. A Nobel Prize in economics went to Peter Diamond for his work and for Michael Spence for their work on signaling value of higher education. So, and many people say, "Arey, graduation to hum sirf shaadi ke liye karte hain." But that's not necessarily true, right? Because employers have always used college as a lazy filter for filtering applications. I mean, the IIT exam is not a selection exam; it's an elimination exam, like UPSC. UPSC is an elimination exam; it's not a selection exam. So the challenge which we had in engineering education and in medical education, because we have run 2 randomized control trials, in education, we thankfully concluded that quantity will lead to quality in the long run. So we went from 200,000 engineers 25 years ago to almost 1.9 million engineers in 2015. Then there was a bit of a slowdown. We went back to 1.2 million engineers. Then we went back up to 1.5 million engineers. So India's people supply chain in engineering is remarkably fluid and resilient. With 200 to 1.9, we're responding almost in real time to demand. No education system in the world is able to respond within a 3 to 5 year time frame. So what we did in software was create, because of the proliferation of engineering colleges, not all of which were good, but over time, the 5 engineering colleges, which started pretty badly in the 1980s, became the people supply chain for BMS, Ramaya, in RV in Bangalore. When they started, they were not considered great, but they broke ahead of the other 200 engineering colleges in Bangalore and became the people supply chain. So 30% of engineering colleges seats in India are empty today, which is a good thing. We're suddenly starting to create choice. And the IT industry only needs 400,000 out of the 1.2 million engineers we produce. So when people say that 80% of people are not employable, they're not being truthful. They're saying 80% will not get a job in the software industry.
That's true.
So essentially, everybody wants a job in the software industry. Even civil engineers, chemical engineers want to work in this because of the wage premium in the software industry, which is where I started out with. So I would submit, let's in the problem in India in medical education was MCI concluded with their license Raj that we will only produce 1 lakh doctors. Now, I think, yes, I agree medicine is different from engineering, but we need 2 lakh doctors, we need 3 lakh doctors, which is why the government in the last 5 years has been wonderful about expanding capacity. Yes, the expansion of capacity has a lower speed limit than engineering and medicine, but I think MCI did a disservice to India since 1991 by not producing 3 lakh, 4 lakh doctors. Yes, you don't need to produce 18 lakh doctors, but by now we should have been at 2 or 3 lakh doctors. And the license Raj means that it still costs 2-3 crores to get a medical seat every year. While in engineering, you can, if you choose to just be an engineer at a lower quality, you can get away with 40-50,000 rupees a year. Of course, the government should pay for all education, but public debt to GDP is now 90%. So, and the government has to pay for defense, it has to pay for many things. So, um, while public investment in education has increased and will continue to increase, the private sector response has also been useful. So I would submit the dilemma purely arise from different business models in engineering. All of it is non-profit, of where you position yourself. Some people are trying to produce PhDs, some people are trying to produce software engineers, some people are just trying to produce engineers. And I think the genetically diverse, statistically independent kinds of institutes that we got in engineering is actually why India has the switching costs in software that China has in manufacturing. Why we have 850 global capability centers setting in India, because there's no other country in the world where you could hire 1,000 Hadoop programmers in a week, or 2,000 Java maintenance engineers. So I would submit that yes, there have been challenges in the engineering education of India. Some engineers are not what you would call engineers by an IIT standard or an NIT standard. But they are engineers and they will get jobs. They will just not get the jobs that they wanted. And if they stay the course and upgrade and repair themselves, I think they could easily also get the jobs they want.
So now coming back to you had mentioned prepare as one of the very important things, right? So as you look ahead, of course, India's done well in software, but now things are moving to AI and things are moving to many other areas. So now, as we are preparing for the next 25 years, right? What are the some of the things that we should prepare for, both as a country and as a parent of a child? What is the preparation now? You're a parent of a child in Bihar.
Mhm.
What is the recommend? What would you suggest that she does to prepare her children for what the country will be?
So, at a country level, I think it is quite obvious that you can't predict where jobs will be in 20 years. I have studied unfortunately, I can't, start a meeting on skill development within 5 minutes, somebody asking, where will jobs be in 10 years? I have studied 50 reports of every country, Japan in 1990, US in 2020, UK in 1980. All of them have the efficacy of palm reading or astrology. It is on a 20-25 year basis. 50% of the jobs created in the US in every decade since 1950 did not exist in the decade before that. So the challenge for education and countries is you can't predict. But that doesn't mean you can't prepare. I think as a country, we need to urbanize, formalize, industrialize, financialize, and improve our human capital, right? We need urbanization where we have 200 cities with more than 1 million people. We need to financialize, we need to take our credit to GDP ratio to 100%. A lot of that, more of it should go to MSMEs. We need to raise private equity, we need to raise venture capital, we need to raise public market flows because finance is the fuel of entrepreneurship. So financialize India. We need to industrialize India, which is we need to take our factory employment from 11% to 18, 19, 20%. And I'll pause for 2 minutes here because everybody thinks the factory train has left the station because automation is no longer possible. So India is too late to this party. I absolutely agree that the peak of any country's labor force in manufacturing was Britain in World War II, which was 45%, and China peaked at 33%, and America peaked at 28%. India will never get to 45, 33, or 28, but 11% is the wrong number. So 18% of our labor force, 19% has to be done in manufacturing, and that is held back by regulatory cholesterol. I think that the Factories Act has 800 jail provisions, the single act. I think that would be the sing. So we have to think about why factories are not coming to India, or why India's biggest single location factory is 45,000 employees, while the largest single location factory in China is 600,000 employees at peak. Today, that same Foxconn factory is only 400,000 employees. But if China could have 600,000 people working in one factory in one location, surely India can have large factories, 80,000 people, 1 lakh people. But today, our largest factory has only 45,000 employees. So I think manufacturing is a key thing India has to do. Financialization is a key thing India has to do. Urbanization in a good way, rather than taking jobs to people, rather than taking people to jobs, let's take jobs to people. So that's what we have to do as a country. And on the human capital side, and I think we do need to formalize India. 63 million employers in India, 12 million don't have an office, 12 million work from home, only 12 million pay GST, only 1 million pay Provident Fund. But there are only 27,500 employers in India with a paid up capital of more than 10 crores. So I think this is really why India is poor, because 6.3 crore enterprises only translate to 27,000 companies with a paid up capital of more than 10 crores. In fact, if you ignore all the others and just focus on why does 6.3 crore enterprises only translate to 27,000 companies, we would solve our jobs problem. So I think this formalization of enterprises, which we have been pursuing quite actively, is very important. The final one of human capital, the 1948 Radhakrishnan report, the 1968 Kothari Committee report, even the 1986 new education policy did not focus on skills. They did not focus on primary education. They did not focus on apprenticeships. So NEP 2020 is a document that finally ends the license Raj. We've allowed foreign universities, where UGC is becoming much more of a development regulator rather than a regulator in a traditional sense. I have had UGC ask me 50 times in the past, who allowed you to do this? Now, innovation has always got to be permissionless. No, I mean, we'll do nothing new. If I have to, if anything new requires permission. So I think the NEP 2020 does a great job in ending the license Raj for higher education. It obviously has a 15-year glide path. And I hope someday we will decide that now we have enough evidence that NEP 2020 should be implemented in the next 5 years. So from a country level, you will urbanize, formalize, industrialize, financialize, and human capital India. Now, at an individual level is where things get complicated for 3 or 4 reasons. What do parents have to think about? One is employment has shifted from being a lifetime contract to a taxi cab relationship. You people will have 5, 7, 10 jobs before the kids that we have, for various reasons. One is because the average life expectancy of an employer has come down. See, when the first Fortune 500 list came out in 1956, the average life expectancy of a Fortune 500 company was 64 years. Now the average life expectancy is 14 years in the list. So what is the value of a pension promise from an employer who's only going to live 14 years? So I think we have to think about employers also not as permanent as they used to be. But while life expectancy of employers has come from 64 to 14, human life expectancy has gone from 34 to 84. So my grandparents probably had 25-year careers. My parents had 35-year careers. We will have 45-year careers, but our kids will have 55-year careers. And this 10 plus 2 plus 3 system may not be appropriate for 55-year careers. It was meant for a 35. You do 10, you do 15 years, you do 18 years, you do 20 years if you do a master's, and then you work for 20 years. But if your working life is going to be 45, 55 years, the notion of lifelong learning, the notion of what you learn up front is not as important, because soft skills are not taught, they are caught. So my view is that you have to really think about learning by doing. You have to think about learning while learning. You have to think of learning with modularity. That means take a 1 year certificate as an opening balance for a 2 year diploma, as an opening balance for a 3 year degree. Think of multiple ways of learning: online learning, on site learning, on job learning, and on campus learning as equivalent. Because India will be the first country where employed learners will cross full time learners. See, most countries, we already have 200 million people working on farms whom we have to need move out. We already have 100 million people working in informal service jobs which need to upgrade themselves to get higher wages. So my sense is that we have only have 40 million people in colleges. I mean, I'm saying only, it's still a very large number, but we should have 100 million or 200 million people in colleges. When we stop thinking about college as IIT or St. Stephen's University or Sri Ram College where I went to, or Oxford University or Harvard University, we need to think about universities as plus bill where people come in and go out. So what parents need to think about their children's careers are that obviously the 10 plus 2 plus 3 system is quite rigid. NEP actually offers multiple options now for the 3 years of college. You could get in after 1 year, go work, come back. I advise that all between my bachelor's degree and my MBA degree, I had 5 years of work experience. Most You get much more out of your MBA. So the first thing parents have to do is stop this tyranny of pehle padhai khatam kar lo phir kaam shuru karo. That is actually the biggest mistake. Doing internships, doing college, doing working in between your bachelor's degree and your master's degree should become the norm. I think sometimes working between your 12th class and your bachelor's degree may become the norm. 1 year of a gap year between your 12th and this. Now people will say ye to raisiyon ki baat hai, people who have the ability to take a year off. I would submit that there are many employers who are open to internships and apprenticeships. India will, learning by doing is a very important part of learning in the future, because soft skills are not taught, they are caught. So I would submit to parents that don't specialize too early. Try and keep it broad, because the world is changing very quickly. You specialize too early. So the broad advice would be, think about learning by doing, think about learning while learning, think about multiple on-ramps and off-ramps for your children's career, and think about skills as distinct from education only if you believe that the world is going to stay the same. There is no difference between education and skills in an employer's mind. We were using education as a lazy proxy, but many employers are now moving away from in the 4 lakh employees that TeamLease has, 2 lakh of them don't have a bachelor's degree and 2 lakh of them don't. We pay the same salary to the 2 lakh people who have a bachelor's degree and who don't have a bachelor's degree. Because at the level that we operate, which is for freshers with 0 to 4 years experience, your skills, your attitude, your language abilities, your reading abilities, your literacy matters much more than your higher order skills. That is not obviously India has many people who get paid crores, but we pay people 28 to 30,000 rupees a month. Our average salary is 28,000 rupees per month. Our average age is, 21. And 50% of them have a bachelor's degree and 50% don't. We are probably going to get to 10 lakh employees at this 28,000 rupees a month. At our level, we are not distinguished between bachelors and non-bachelors. So treat college as an important social signaling value. Hopefully, NEP reforms will also give employability signaling value as degree apprenticeships. Degree apprenticeships are a new life form in education, where you get your bachelor's degree over 5 years, in which you combine an apprenticeship with your bachelor's degree being done either part-time or on-site or online. I think actually the future of education is degree apprenticeships. And even if you don't formally join a degree apprenticeship program, you should make your degree apprenticeship program by pursuing internships and apprenticeships while you pursue college.
A lot of people ask, and I'm going from the perspective of parents and people looking for jobs rather than the economy and macroeconomy.
Mhm.
And a lot of people from India are, going to colleges in India, but a lot of people are spending a huge amount of money and going to colleges worldwide.
Mhm.
And some come back, some don't come back. But when you look at India's job situation, how do you look at that, and how do you look at education in India versus somewhere else?
See, I think that India is a big beneficiary. Just like I said, India's software exports exported more software than Saudi Arabia did oil in 2021. India receives $120 billion in remittances from its 17 million diaspora. I actually hope we can take this 17 million to 30 million. you know, maybe we should export
Okay.
another 30 million people, because the world is aging. India has a lot of skills and a lot of people. India's brand in software makes us logical for guest worker programs, people who go. I used to view this 17 million as brain drain. I view it as brain circulation.
Oh,
There's
circulation. Okay.
yeah, there's no unicorn, and unicorns are startups worth more than $1 billion. There are 120 of them in India. There's not a single unicorn in India which does not have a member of the diaspora, either as a member of the management team, or as a board member, or as an investor. So our 13 million diaspora has contributed substantially by learning technology from the West, or learning techniques from the West, and bringing them to help us back. I mean, you spent time in Minneapolis, you spent time in Chicago, and you came back and you brought that productivity back to McKinsey India first, and now you're bringing it back to your country. It's a form of technology. And finally, technology is what leads to prosperity. It's not about more cooks in the kitchen, it is a different recipe. Finally, rich countries have better recipes. They don't necessarily have more people and throwing more cooks in the kitchen. Skill development, education, repair, prepare, and upgrade are all better recipes for making our people more productive. So I think our 13 million diaspora will go to 30 million, hopefully through legal migration. See, illegal migration is giving legal migration a bad name. And migration shouldn't always lead to citizenship. I'm not a big believer. Politics is being poisoned by migration because of citizenship being the destination or the desire of most migrants. I would also advise caution with many kids who view a bachelor's degree in UK and US and Australia as a path to not only migration but also path to citizenship. The world is changing. I think we should view our time overseas as learning from them, learning why they are rich, learning what they do well, learning what they do badly. Many rich countries do many things badly, and bring that back to India and make ourselves. I mean, DeepSeek, or did not have a single person who studied overseas. India's pharmaceutical industry, Lupin, Cipla, Sun Pharma, were created by people who had not studied abroad. India's software industry were people not created by people who had studied abroad. Now, many of them work with people abroad. They're global companies. Every American eats 5 made in India pills every day. So we have created an
That's
industry
right.
which is global. So I would think of studying abroad as a form of technology. I would say the return on investment is very high for 5 or 10% of the students who are able to stay back. But I would think that there were 3 lakh students who went to the US. There were probably 5 lakh students who went to some other country totally. I mean, went abroad last year for undergrad education. I am hoping that NEP is creating a number of universities in India which are offering world-class education, which are offering liberal arts educations, which are offering engineering or pure sciences educations, in which was not available when I went to Sri Ram College, or maybe when you went to IIT. There were few options. So I would say that there's a lot going on. People who want to go abroad should go abroad. I hope they all come back. I hope the diaspora goes there and
Right.
comes back, because that would be a gift to human capital as much as 20 more IITs would be. And I think that's already happening. 80% of IIT Delhi in 1973 went overseas. This year, less than 20, 30% went overseas. Now, some people say, oh, that's not pull, it's push. I disagree. I think that India, the sthana balam, the word Sanskrit has a word, there's a word called sthana balam. Sthan ka bal ho jata hai. It's not roots, it's marination in ecosystem. So I think for people who can afford it, I would also advise undergrad in India and grad school overseas is a better combination than undergrad overseas from my perspective. But as of now, I think that the direct option of going overseas is not directly going to lead to jobs and citizenship because the world is changing anyway.
The in terms of some of the high tech areas that India wants to be better in or leaders in going forward, like AI, biotech, green climate funding, et cetera, solar panels, all of that, right? The real advantage that some people say India has is that we can actually graduate more PhDs and masters in those technologies than any other country.
Yes.
And that really pulls things up for India. Any comments and thoughts on that?
I mean, it is remarkable that IIT Bombay this year will have 500 PhDs. I mean, I think that is a substantially increased number over any expectations that I had hoped they would reach this quickly by that time. Now, again, there's criticism of a PhD is not a PhD. I disagree with that completely. So I think that India will service all three segments of the job market. We will do the extreme cognitive stuff, which needs PhDs. We will do AI. We will do chip design. I mean, in chip design, at least India already is demonstrating switching costs or capabilities that other non-software industries don't, non-software countries like ours don't have. I think we will do the make in India for becomes made for India. So we will develop the middle of the job market. And at the bottom of the job market, we are already sort of starting to accelerate the move from farm to non-farm employment. I think unless we do the manufacturing and China is making life easy, I hope Xi Jinping doesn't get a fourth term. I hope he gets a life term because he is our biggest ally. I think Deng Xiaoping, I respect him just because he's probably the only human being who enabled the process of moving 700 million people from farm to non-farm employment. And people should not be worried about farm security. I'm not looking down on farmers. I think farmers have very hard jobs. But America produces more food than we do with 2% of its labor force working on farms. So this antibiotic reaction, when I say the only way to help farmers is to have less farmers, I actually believe farming should be made viable. But farming will not be viable unless we reduce 45% of our labor force on farms to 5%. And we need to move those people to some high-tech jobs in which I think India has an unfair advantage in chip design and AI and everything else. Yes, we should have been the ones to produce the first cheap large language model, but or small language model. But I think we will in the future because we've now sort of giving ourselves the biggest change that has happened in India is the level of ambition of the young people. I think that we give ourselves permission now to recognize that you don't have to be Western to be modern. I think that is happening in academia, that is happening in policy making, that is happening in startups, that's happening even in multinationals. In fact, MNCs may be the new, they may be much slower than the Indian companies. So what makes a country strong? My favorite Hindi poet is, Ramdhari Singh Dinkar. He says, Shama Shobhati us bhujang ko jiske paas garal ho. Only the powerful can be kind, benevolent, and generous. The weak cannot be kind, benevolent, and generous. And I think India was weak economically for decades after independence. We were weak because obviously the British had given us a difficult opening balance, but we didn't help ourselves with the 1955 Avadi resolution or the 1956 second five-year plan. But I think now with our plans for sort of India at 100, Viksit Bharat, with NEP 2020, with the various vertical ministries, whether it's the semiconductor mission, whether it is the revolution in railways, whether it is the revolution in DBT, whether it is NPCI, whether it is just digital public infrastructure. is a remarkable gift to India's sort of modernity in some ways. So I actually think that the next 25 years will be very different from the last 25 years in India.
I think on that note, I love your optimism, with facts, as you said, right? On jobs and on employment in India. It has been fascinating. I think there are 10 other directions we could go in, and maybe we'll have you back to talk about some of the other areas. But on jobs and employment, I think you gave everyone a very, very good picture, not just of what's happening in India, but what individuals can do as they map out their own careers. Manish, thank you very, very much for a lovely conversation. Thank you.